you've ever felt frustrated by conflicting health advice, you're not alone. I've been there too, which is why I've turned myself into a guinea pig to discover the mysteries of holistic health and nutrition. I'm Niklas Gustafson, and in this podcast we go beyond mainstream narratives to uncover real solutions with the brightest minds in health, science, and entrepreneurship. Today, a legend in health and nutrition, Dr. Stephen Gundry, will join me on this journey. He's a four-time New York Times bestselling author, gut health pioneer, and host of the Dr. Gundry Podcast. And today he will reveal how your gut controls your brain. If you've ever struggled with brain fog or low energy, this episode might change everything. Thank you so much, Dr. Gundry. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And before we dive into the science, I love to ask every guest, what does health truly mean to you?
Oh, wow. Well, I'm being able to do what you want to do regardless of your chronological age. How's that? That'll work for me.
That sounds great. You've written several bestsellers. Your newest release, The Gut-Brain Paradox, right? What is the most shocking discovery in your research?
Well, there's a lot of them, but I like each book, and I think this is the ninth book in the Paradox series. I like each book to kind of build on what I talked about or learned in the previous book, but I still see patients 6 days a week, even on the weekends. And so I've had the ability over the last 25, 30 years to see trends in various things I would have never thought I'd be interested in. So one of the things I talk about in the book is early on, I would see a number of people, particularly women, who uh, were on one or two antidepressant medications. And they'd been on them for years. In fact, many of them had been on them for so long that they didn't put depression as as a concern. And yet there were their meds, and they go, oh, well, I've tried to get off of them, but it never works. And, I'm just on them. And I would say, I'll bet you that as we go along, and we'd be working on, an autoimmune issue or obesity issue. I said, I bet you we'll get you off of these things. And they go, well, yeah, okay, fine. And sure enough, as we worked on rebuilding their gut wall, which I talk a lot about, and probably equally as importantly, changing the microbiome within them, as I talk about in this book, their terrain, then what we found almost predictably is that they no longer had need for antidepressants and they weaned themselves off. So I said, I ought to talk about this and I ought to, delve into the science of why this is happening. And one of the things that I think is shocking to most people is that there is actually a very strong correlation between the types of bacteria that live in our gut, our microbiome, the good guys and bad guys balance, which I call the terrain of our microbiome, and the porosity or leakiness of the wall of our gut. And once you fix all of those, remarkably, one of the things that you can prove in animal models, and certainly I've seen in human subjects, is that things like depression and anxiety and even mood and even personality is actually in large part coming from our microbiome. And people go, now, wait a minute, come on, I'm, the highest evolved creature in the history of the world. And you're telling me that little single cell organisms could have that much effect on this, massive thinking machine. And yes, that's exactly what I'm telling people, and get over it. Um, Bacteria have been around for, we think, about 3 billion years, and we've only been around maybe 100,000. Uh, and bacteria have evolved amazing mechanisms of not only survival, but of dictating, manipulating their host, their symbiotic organism, to get them the things they want. And like I say, let's get over it and let's understand who the bad guys are, who the good guys are, give the good guys what they want to eat, and they'll take care of the rest.
At what point you were deep into the world of heart surgery, right? Literally saving lives on the operating table. What moment made you rethink everything and shift your focus to nutrition?
Well, yeah, I give all the credit to this guy I call Big Ed, who, as the name implies, was a very large individual. When I met him, he weighed 265 pounds. Um, he was from Miami, Florida. He was 48 years old. He had inoperable coronary artery disease. That means his blood vessels were so clogged up that you couldn't put stents in them. You couldn't do bypasses because there wasn't any place to land a bypass. And I, at that time, was a professor and chairman of cardiothoracic surgery at Loma Linda University, nearby where I am right now. And I was one of those people who would take on impossible cases. And therefore, there's always a few of us idiots. And so this guy had gone around the country to various centers with his angiogram, with the movie of his blood vessels. And everywhere he went, everybody turned him down. And he spent about 6 months doing this. And he came to me about 6 months into this, bearing his angiogram. And I looked at it and I said, I got to agree with everybody else. They're right. I can't help you. They can't help you. They're right. Sorry. And he says, well, look, I've been at this 6 months. I've been on a diet and I've lost 45 pounds. Now, again, this is a 265-pound gentleman talking to me. And he says, I went to a health food store and I bought all these supplements and I've been taking them. And he literally brings in a giant shopping bag of supplements. And he says, maybe I did something in here. And, I'm scratching my professor beard and going, well, good for you for losing weight. And I know what you did with all those supplements. You made expensive urine, which I firmly believed at that time. And he said, well, why, how would it hurt to get another angiogram? And I go, well, don't get your hopes up, but okay. So we get a new angiogram. And this guy in 6 months' time has cleaned out 50% of the blockages in his heart in 6 months.
Wow.
Now, that's impossible if you believe conventional wisdom. Impossible. But there I am, looking at it. Now, if I know what I know now, I would have gone, wow, that's great. Keep doing what you're doing. Have a nice day. But I didn't know that. So I actually operated on him the next day and I did a 5-vessel bypass because now there were places to put bypasses. But after I'm done, because I'm a researcher, I go, tell me about this diet and let me look through that bag of supplements. And he starts telling me about this diet and I go, time out. I went to Yale University back in the dark ages. And in those dark ages, I guess because we're supposedly smart, could design our own major and basically have a master's thesis that we would have to defend, at the end of 4 years. And so my thesis was you could take a great ape, manipulate its food supply, manipulate its environment, and prove you'd arrive at a human being. And I described the diet that did this and the environment. And I do actually defended my thesis and got an honors and gave it to my parents and went off to be a famous heart surgeon. So Big Ed is describing my crazy thesis of what early man ate. And that's what he had been eating. And so I said, wait a minute, let me look at these supplements. And I was famous for keeping hearts alive during heart transplants, sitting in a bucket of ice water. And I was famous for protecting the heart during heart surgery. And I had a catheter that I designed that's still used in most heart surgeries today. And I was putting down chemicals and goodies in the blood to protect the heart. And I'm going through his stuff, and half the stuff that I'm putting down these arteries to protect the heart, he's swallowing. And I'm going, oh, God, it never occurred to me to swallow the dumb things. So why it's so poignant or serendipitous is that even though I was a world famous heart surgeon at the top of my career, I was 70 pounds overweight, despite running 30 miles a week, going to the gym 1 hour a day, and eating a healthy, low-fat diet, because that's what you're supposed to. And I had high cholesterol, high blood pressure, pre-diabetes. I had migraine headaches. I don't recommend doing baby heart transplants with a migraine headache, but I did. And I had such bad arthritis, I had to wear braces on my knees. And I was told, well, your dad has the same profile, and that's genetics, and have a nice day. So I called my parents and said, hey, do you have my thesis? And they said, oh, yeah. And I said, send it up to me. So I started swallowing a bunch of the supplements, and then I put myself on this program. And I lost 50 pounds my first year. My cholesterol normalized, my high blood pressure went away, my pre-diabetes went away, my arthritis went away, my migraines stopped. I haven't had a migraine in 30 years. And I go, wow, this is interesting. So I would operate on patients and then hand them a yes and no sheet of paper. Eat this, don't eat this. And I'd send them to a health food store and say, here, I want you to buy these supplements because I never want to see you again. Because if we don't make some change, you'll be back in 5 years and I'll do it all over again. And that's conventional wisdom. We've been taught that we can slow these processes down if we're lucky, but we'll never stop them. So as a year went by, and lo and behold, the changes that I saw in me, I was seeing in my patients. Their diabetes went away. Their hypertension went away. Their arthritis went away. And I'm having this epiphany one Friday morning before going to work, going, wait a minute, I've got this all wrong. I shouldn't operate on people first and then teach them how to avoid me the rest of their lives. I should teach them how to eat, and I'll never have to operate on them in the first place. Now, that's a really dumb idea for a heart surgeon, but my wife backed me. So I actually resigned my position and set up a clinic in Palm Springs, which is very near Loma Linda. And basically asked people, look, every 3 months we want to draw a bunch of blood work on you that insurance will cover. And, here's the yes and no list of food. Here's the list. I want you to go to the health food store and let's see what happens. Are you in? And, because I'm a researcher. And lo and behold, we could start seeing the things on blood work and, of course, in their outcomes that we postulated would happen. And thanks to my patients, I've been doing this now for 30 years and I get to see these things. So that was Big Ed's fault. So
And that's all related to gut health,
Yep.
right? And gut health is something people hear a lot about, but I don't think most truly understand its power. Could you explain what the microbiome is and its role in influencing mental health?
yeah. The so I'm a slow learner. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, said 2,500 years ago that all disease begins in the gut. Now, the guy was absolutely right. I've spent now 30 years figuring out why he was right or how he was right. And I think it's wise to kind of look back at what his teachings were. And I've written about it in other books, but I think it's always wise to resurface that. So Hippocrates thought that all of us had a green life force energy, which is the translation from Greek, that wanted all of us to have perfect health, any animal, and that there were external factors that were suppressing the green life force energy from expressing itself in persons with a problem. And he felt the purpose of a physician was to be a sleuth, a detective, to find out what these external factors were and to teach the patient to remove them. And then the green life force energy would fix the problem. Now, it sounds very hokey and very California speak, but we should probably call it the brown life force energy. And because what he was actually referring to was the gut microbiome. And so this microbiome, we didn't really even know that these guys existed until the Human Microbiome Project started in 2007 and finished in 2016. And lo and behold, it's almost like you send one of these deep diving submersibles down, you know, 10 miles into the black abyss under crushing pressure, temperatures, no sunlight. And there's an entire population, of fish and creatures. Then you go, wait a minute, this is impossible. These things can't exist. And there they are. So now we find out that there are at least 100 trillion bacteria in our guts, and untold more fungi, viruses, worms. And what we've learned is that this is a teeming tropical rainforest. In the book, I call it the terrain, where all of these different species are interdependent and are talking to each other. And they're not only talking to each other, but we now know that they exist to actually make us exist. We're kind of just carrying them around, and they direct our activities. If you think about it, we're they only get to eat what we eat. Now, long ago, that wasn't a problem because the things we ate contained foods that would kind of filter down to them, and everybody won, and they got what they needed, we got what we needed, and everything's great. As the book shows, and my previous book shows, that whole system about 50 to 70 years ago got completely disrupted. And through processed foods, through Roundup, through antibiotics, and I go through all of these, the foods that these guys need to survive, they're not getting anymore. And they're mad as hell and they're not going to take it any longer. They've been replaced by what I call the bad guys, who can also manipulate our brain to get them the foods that they like. And it just so happens that the foods the bad guys like are not the foods the good guys can use. And correspondingly, here's the good news from the book: the foods the good guys like can't be used by the bad guys. And so the whole book is, look, we know what we used to need. We know what the good guys want. We know how to give them what they want. And here's what we do. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's
So you introduced this fascinating idea called the holobiome, which honestly sounds like something from a science fiction movie. Could you explain what it means and why it changes everything we thought we knew about health?
yeah. So I guess most people now have heard of the microbiome. And most when we talk about the microbiome, that's who's living in our intestines, primarily our colon, our large bowel. But we now know that our skin has its own microbiome. About 700 different species live on our skin. Our mouth has its own microbiome. At least 1,000 different species live in our mouth and our nose. Um, Anywhere our insides meet the outsides, there's a microbiome. Breast tissue, where breast ducts meet the microbiome, have a microbiome. Guys, wake up. Your prostate has a microbiome. Um, Anywhere that reaches externally has a microbiome. The pancreas has a microbiome. The liver has a microbiome.
And they're all different.
And yeah, all different. We even know we can actually do oral swabs, and we can identify people who will have a pancreatic cancer microbiome based on their oral swab. It's that scary. And what's really interesting is we have a microbiome that literally is floating around us. That microbiome, many of us, so the whole conglomeration should be called the holobiome. So it's everything. And it gets really interesting. We are pretty convinced that the concept of personal space is, well, how close will you let somebody next to you? Is when your holobiome hits the holobiome of the other person. And it goes, whoop, wait a minute. There's really interesting conjecture that the reason kissing is a universal human trait and also many animals, it's your microbiome deciding whether that microbiome of that individual you're kissing is a long-term compatibility. Now you go, oh, come on. This is just so sci-fi, it's ridiculous. And yet, if you take the alternative view that bacteria are the original folks here, and they've had 3 billion years to decide how to go about this. And we're a relative newcomer, and it might be in their interest to make sure that the person you're going to cohabitate with has bugs that they're going to get along with, because people who cohabitate eventually share a great amount of their holobiome. So talk about, dating apps.
So we keep hearing about dysbiosis and
Yeah.
leaky gut, but I think many people still don't get what's actually happening inside their bodies. Could you break this down? I mean, what's going on in the gut, and how does that spill over to our mental health?
Yeah. So there's two factors. Number one, we know both from animal and human studies that there are certain bacteria that will make you anxious by, let me back up for a second. We now know that there is a comp- understood language between bacteria and us. And that luckily has been elucidated, and it happens more every day, that the language and how to interpret it, we're rapidly beginning to understand and interpret and translate that language. It's so complex, and I take people down even a deeper rabbit hole than I've ever talked about before, text messages are being exchanged constantly between these single-celled organisms and our neurons in our brain. And so this is going on all the time. This not just a bunch of crap. The first chapter is shit for brains, and it's true. Uh, so the microbiome, we know there are species that identify with people being calm. We know there are species that identify with people being anxious. We know that you can actually predict personality based on the microbiome that the baby is born with. And so if somebody's a crabby baby, it's actually because of the makeup of their microbiome. And again, let's get over it, folks. And that's what I try to establish in the book. Look, here's the evidence. We can take the microbiome, a poop from a depressed individual, and feed them to normal, happy mice. Now, how can you do that? Believe it or not, mice love to eat poop. So it's really easy to do. You feed them to happy mice, and the mice will become depressed. Seriously. Now, if you then give those mice antibiotics and wipe out that microbiome, and then feed the mice poop from happy individuals, lo and behold, they'll get happy again. Yeah, this isn't a placebo effect. You didn't tell the mice, hey, I'm going to give you some really depressive poop and you're going to get depressed. Doesn't work that way. So, and we actually, this was described back in the 1930s, where they took depressed individuals that were institutionalized in those days, and they gave them fecal enemas from happy people. And believe it or not, they got happy. Um, so, and it gets even more bizarre. I write about, we know, unfortunately, sometimes you get such a bad infection in your intestines from C. difficile that a fecal transplant is the only way to save their lives, and it works. But interestingly enough, the fecal transplant is from another individual. And because, for instance, families tend to share a microbiome, in fecal transplants, we actually try to get a donor, a family member, to be the fecal transplant donor. And there's a great paper written up in the British Medical Journal about a woman who actually was a marathon runner and skinny. And she got a fecal transplant from a cousin who happened to be about 30 pounds overweight. And within a year, without changing this woman's diet, she gained 30 pounds. And why? Because now she had, for instance, an obesogenic microbiome. And unbeknownst to her, not only did it change her behavior, but these particular bugs were more efficient at extracting calories from food and passing them on to her.
Wow. So when you say that family members share more or less the same microbiome, is that because they eat more or less the same, they have the same diet, they live in the same environment, or is it also generic?
Yeah, there is a tiny piece of genetics, and it's not very big at all. Uh, Twin studies show that twins that are raised in separate environments, they follow whatever happened to them in their environment, not their genes. And I mentioned some twin studies in this book proving that point. But what's really interesting is, in our previous books, you can catch an obesity microbiome by associating with obese people. It is a communicable disease. People who associate with lean people can catch lean disease. Have skinny friends is one of my, no, hey, as a former obese, I love obese people. I was one. I'm not shaming. I'm not shaming at all because now we know this is not a behavioral issue. This is a gut microbiome issue. And that's actually the whole hope of the book. If you have depression, if you're obese, if you're addictive, and I spend several chapters on the addictive microbiome, this is not a brain problem. This is not a psychological weakness that you have. This is driven by microbiome, usually through pain. And I go into that extensively to make you seek out these things. Believe it or not, there is a opioid seeking microbiome. And there is an alcohol seeking microbiome.
It is actually in your book, there's a chapter, and this actually blew my mind because when you're mentioning alcohol, opioids, and you actually say that there is a direct link between gut health and addiction. How does that work?
So again, this gets back to the fundamental premise of the book, is that our likes and dislikes, our behaviors are guided by this collection of bacteria. And I I use the example of we have very few genes as a human being. Bacteria don't have as many genes per bacteria, but because there are so many of them, they have like tenfold more genetic computing power than we do. And they're constantly dividing. And they're actually constantly exchanging genes. They can, hey guys, you like this gene that allows you to resist antibiotics? I happen to have it. Here, I'll give it to you. And they literally exchange little pieces of genes. So a lot of us think that just like, for instance, I'm on a computer, you are too. I have very little computing power, memory in this computer. You and I are working through the cloud right now, and that's where our computing power resides. We're pretty convinced that we have designated our bacterial, our holobiome, as our cloud computing power, where most of the decision making on second to second, day to day living is made. And so that's scary. But again, guess what? This is the design that worked. And so you can show, for instance, that let's just take opioids for an example. Actually, take something even easier. NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, things like ibuprofen, naproxen, something that everybody takes every day for pain. Well, we've known for a very long time, in fact, drug companies knew when they invented these, that these substances are really good at causing leaky gut, causing intestinal permeability, and really good at changing the microbiome from a friendly gut buddy microbiome to a dysplastic bad guy microbiome. They've known this from the beginning. In fact, when these drugs came out, number one, they were by prescription only. And the FDA in the United States would not allow any more than 2 weeks use. You could not write a prescription for longer than 2 weeks. Why? Because they knew how dangerous these were in the long term. They knew that. I've got all the drug company literature on it. So if they knew this, why did this happen? They're now the most widely used over-the-counter medication there is. So what happens is when you get leaky gut and you get bad bugs, you actually leak bad bugs and other things across the wall of the gut. And 80% of all of our white blood cells are lining the wall of our gut. And they're there because bad guys can come through. And they actually send out text messages to our brain that says, "Oh my gosh, we're under attack. I got to get your attention." How do they get your attention? They use pain. Pain is a really good attention getter, and I write in the book how that works. So, with pain, what do? You actually seek out more painkillers. And when you take more of these painkillers, you get more of the bad bugs getting what they want to eat, and they make more pain, and the process increases. It's the same with opioids. We know that they do the exact same thing. They actually change your microbiome. They cause leaky gut, which gives you more pain, and then you will seek out more. But what's worse is they make you tolerant to that amount of painkiller. Why? Because they want more. And you can prove this in animals. You can get a opioid addicted rat, and they'll be happy to get addicted. And you can kill off their microbiome. And lo and behold, a little tiny dose of morphine is all that's needed to relieve their pain. Then you repopulate that gut with the microbiome from a opioid addicted rat, and presto changeo, all of a sudden you need massive amounts of morphine to get the same effect. So it sounds, even to me, it sounds like, nah, come on, that it can't be like that, but it is. And again, I'm a scientist. This is reproducible. And we have to realize that all of the attempts to treat addiction, whatever addiction it is, has been a dismal failure. The recidivism rate is about 90% for whatever addiction you'd care to study. And that's because we're trying to treat this. And we have to realize that this is under control from that. And
Right.
if we put our attention there, I mean, I've seen some wonderful changes, and they're described in the book. And not just me, I show other examples where this is done. So,
Mm. So it's clear now that the gut plays a huge role in the brain, but there's another piece to this, which is the energy production. And you talked a lot about mitochondrial uncoupling. And I know some listeners might be hearing this for the first time. So, could you please explain why it's such a big deal for metabolism and also for aging?
yeah. So, I devoted actually two books to mitochondrial uncoupling. One is The Energy Paradox, and the other is Unlocking the Keto Code. And it's a really difficult concept to get your head around. But uh, mitochondria are these ancient engulfed bacteria that are the energy producing power plants in almost all of our cells. And almost everybody remembers mitochondria from high school biology, where you saw this little squiggly guy inside the cell and it had little lines in it. Some people describe it as a radiator. Uh, there can be like a neuron in our brain can have uh, 1,000 mitochondria in one cell, just to give you an idea. So mitochondria make ATP, our energy currency, basically from taking either glucose or free fatty acids and combining them with oxygen in an assembly line, which is called the electron transport chain. And you go through multiple steps and multiple, you excite electrons, you move protons, and finally you combine an oxygen molecule with uh, a carbon atom and you get ATP. It's really hard work, number one. There's all sorts of mischief that can happen. Instead of protons combining with an oxygen atom, electrons are more than happy to combine with an oxygen atom. But those are bad guys. Those are reactive oxygen species, which can actually do damage to the working of the mitochondria. So there has to be a uh, a way to damp down the fire. And so it turns out that we have a number of trap doors in this assembly line where we can act like a pop-off valve in a pressure cooker. And if the pressure gets too high in a pressure cooker, the pop-off valve goes and you release some steam. We have uncoupling molecules that open up the valves of this pressure cooker to diffuse the damage to a mitochondria. And they're controlled by what are called uncoupling proteins. And so it turns out that mitochondrial uncoupling is actually built into our mitochondrial system. And it turns out, kind of fun fact, the reason we're a warm-blooded animal is during mitochondrial uncoupling, we generate heat. Uh, Biohackers know all about brown fat, and brown fat looks brown because it's chock full of mitochondria. That's what actually makes it look brown. Why are all those mitochondria there? Well, believe it or not, they're generating heat. So we uncouple mitochondria to generate heat. That's why we have brown fat. And the more brown fat you have, the healthier you are, to get back to your point. So uncoupling mitochondria protects mitochondria, but also stimulates mitochondria to repair themselves because something's obviously amiss with them, and to make more mitochondria because when you uncouple mitochondria, they don't make as much ATP as they used to. And that might be a bad thing, but if you simultaneously make more mitochondria, each has to do less work, but you'll get more energy. And in the past, I've described it. Look, if I've got a dog sled, and you're from Sweden, so if I've got a dog sled with one dog, yeah, the dog can pull the sled. We're not going to go very far, and we're not going to go very fast. But if I hook up 6 dogs to the dog sled, I'm going to go a lot farther. I'm going to go a lot faster. But guess what? I have to now feed 6 dogs. So the consequence is, by uncoupling mitochondria, you're going to have happier dogs. You're going to have going a lot farther, but you're going to use up some more fuel. And that actually has a benefit for the fact that 80% of Americans are overweight or obese. And so that's mitochondria repair themselves with uncoupling.
Without coupling. Okay. So people are desperate for real solutions. And based on your experience, how much can diet and lifestyle actually restore the microbiome? And how quickly can someone see the changes?
Well, when I started all this, I was rather naive that I thought I could repair leaky gut in a couple weeks. It literally takes most people 9 months to a year to repair leaky gut. Yeah, it takes that long. How do I know that? Because we can measure leaky gut. It's not pseudoscience. We can do blood tests to measure it. All of this was worked out by pediatric gastroenterologist who's now at Harvard by the name of Alessio Fasano, from Italy originally. And so we know this exists. Hippocrates knew it existed, but we didn't know how to measure it. And we know how to repair it. But what I thought could happen fairly quickly doesn't. Um, but it can be fixed.
Can't you? I mean, so it takes almost 1 year, but I suppose you can see changes little by
Oh, yeah.
little, right?
So we measure this every 3 months. Uh, and we absolutely can see this happen. We see the progress in 3 months, but to get it completely sealed, I mean, can it be faster? Yes. Um, I'll give you an example that I've written about and talked about. When about 80% of my practice now is autoimmune disease, and quite frankly, autoimmune disease is caused by leaky gut. So when we first started doing autoimmune markers in all of our patients, we did them on ourselves. And when my results came back, my administrator came back, says, "Hey, doc, you've got lupus, lupus erythematosus." Because I had a marker anti-nuclear antibody. I don't have lupus. Come on. And she said, "Yeah, you're positive for this marker." And I go, that's interesting because my father's side of the family, my father had horrible psoriasis. He was on an immunosuppressant, methotrexate, for 51 years. My aunt had it. And I'm going, there is a genetic family history component to autoimmune disease. Small, but it's real. And I'm always experimenting with food. That's my job, I think. And so I said, I'm going to stop experimenting. I'm going to follow the yes and no list, and I'll check my results in 3 weeks. And sure enough, in 3 weeks, I was negative for this marker for autoimmune disease. I go, pretty cool. So when I was editing The Longevity Paradox, another of my bestsellers a few years ago, we were editing in New York City, and we didn't finish on Friday. And I said, what the heck, I'll stay the weekend and we'll finish up on Monday. So I got a weekend in New York City. I said, you know, I'm going to try to create my autoimmune disease. So I cheated. I had pizza and I had tomatoes and I had bread and I had pasta. I had beans, cashews, and I came back and drew my blood. Sure enough, I'm positive for lupus. I go, that's really cool. I can make leaky gut in a weekend. I wonder how long it'll take me to turn it off. So I waited 1 week, ate perfect. 1 week later, I'm negative for anti-nuclear antibody. So what does that teach me? Number one, I can make leaky gut in a week by cheating. Number two, I've got a pretty robust microbiome. I've got a pretty doggone good wall of my gut, and I can repair the damage very quickly. And so one of the things but that's me. I've got 25 years of working at this. But the point of all this is you can cause leaky gut, activate your immune system really easily. But you want to be able to undo the damage just as quickly. And that's how we were actually designed. There's no question in my mind that almost on a daily basis, we can get cause leaky gut. And it's one of the things I teach my patients. Look, I can repair your leaky gut. But if you keep swallowing razor blades, you'll just tear it right back open. And we in our culture have wonderful ways to swallow razor blades. And that's the good news and the bad.
So if someone wants, I mean, listening right now, wants to fix their gut, where should they start? I mean, what are the first few steps they could take today?
Yeah. So one of the first things you got to do is you got to take vitamin D3. It is so imperative to have high amounts of vitamin D in your bloodstream. Number one.
Sorry, and when you say take, you can get it from the sun, right? Sunlight, grass-fed beef,
Yeah,
fish.
the problem with sunlight, and don't get me wrong, go get sun exposure. But once you get a tan, and it looks like you got a pretty good tan, you'll actually
Madrid is very sunny.
uh, you'll stop making vitamin D. you'll block vitamin D production. So almost 80% of patients in Southern California have low levels of vitamin D. And you go, what the heck? It's sunny all the time in Southern California. Well, that's because we're applying sunscreen and we're wearing long sleeve shirts and we're using a hat because we're so afraid of the sun. But the higher vitamin D is, believe it or not, the more diverse your microbiome is. And believe me, you want a diverse tropical rainforest. You want a diverse terrain. Secondly, vitamin D is essential to make stem cells that line our gut activate and repair leaky gut. And number three, vitamin D tells our overactive immune system, and believe me, our immune systems are on hyperdrive. Calm down. Don't be so trigger happy. And so the number one thing that I ask people to do is take vitamin D. Most people in European language need a bare minimum of 125 micrograms of vitamin D3 a day, preferably 250 micrograms a day. I have never seen vitamin D toxicity, even up to 45,000 international units a day. Other groups have not seen it as well. So that's number one. Number two, you've got to give your gut microbiome, the good guys, what I call gut buddies, things they need to eat. And that is soluble fiber. In some ways, it's really easy. One of the things I'm incredibly impressed with, particularly in France and in Italy and Portugal, is the amount of salads that contain chicory family of vegetables, radicchio, treviso, frisee, Belgian endive. These are some of the best soluble fiber foods there are.
Is that inulin?
Onion,
That's inulin, right? Yeah.
artichokes, artichoke hearts,
Yeah. Yeah.
asparagus. Tubers are actually rich sources. Uh, Jerusalem artichokes are another great source. So you can even swallow capsules of, for instance, psyllium fiber. You can mix psyllium fiber in water and drink it. You can take chicory capsules. This is the food your gut needs. But, and this is phenomenal work that came out of Stanford by the Sonnenberg husband and wife team. You can take people, give them lots of enough, look at their gut microbiome diversity, and look at their inflammation markers, and they do not change. And you go, but wait a minute, Dr. Gundry says feed them what they want and they'll be happy. It turns out they then took people, gave them inulin, but they gave them fermented foods. In this case, it was primarily yogurts and kefirs. Then and only then, the combination of fermented foods and these prebiotics, their gut microbiome diversity increased and their inflammatory markers went down. So you've got to have precursors on this assembly line that I talk about. Right. So you have to have both. And, and it's easy to get fermented foods. The easiest way is vinegar. All vinegars are fermented foods, and they contain a really important short-chain fatty acid called acetic acid or acetate that's essential to make these longer short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, which is the holy grail. Yeah. So those are some of the easiest things that people could do.
Right. A lot of people think they're eating healthy, but they're actually making things worse. So, what are some of the most harmful diets people should ditch immediately?
Well, I'm going to speak just from an American standpoint for a minute, because as it shows in most of my books, we have really done an amazing job of poisoning our microbiome with Roundup, which contains glyphosate. And Roundup is ubiquitous in the United States. We spray it on all our crops. All our wheat is sprayed with Roundup. All of our oats, all of our soybeans, all of our corn is sprayed with Roundup, even non-GMO. It's in our water supply. It's in our California wine. And Roundup is really good at killing off good guys in our gut, number one. It's really good at paralyzing mitochondria. And it's really good. There's a new paper out in mice causing Alzheimer's. I'll give you the good news. When we repair leaky gut of my patients, and I've got a 94% success rate of remission of autoimmune disease in a year, not bad. They go over to Europe and they go, France or Italy or Spain, and they eat the food over there. They have bread, they have croissants, they have pizza, and they don't react. And they go, Dr. Gundry's cured me. I can have these things. They come back to the United States and they start eating our bread and our pizza. And within weeks, their autoimmune disease reappears. Their psoriasis pops out. Their joints swell. They get a bad mood.
Because of the glyphosate mainly.
And they call up and say, "What the heck? I thought you cured me." I said, "No. We got your gut repaired. You could tolerate the food in Europe because luckily you guys don't have as much glyphosate. It's coming. It's on the way. Bayer bought Monsanto, as you know. But when we come back here, it just shocks me. And I write about this in the book.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we all move to Europe? Yes.
So if you could pick just one change that would have the biggest impact on someone's health, what would that be?
Well, the one change, again, I'll speak to my North American audience. The one change, 100% of people with leaky gut that I see have antibodies to wheat, rye, barley, oats, and corn, gluten. Even people who have been gluten-free for 10 years still have antibodies. So the good news is those antibodies go away. They're gone. So we've been vaccinated against these various grain lectins. Now we can forget that vaccination. It can wear off, and that's actually the exciting thing. But the first thing I do is have people, give up most grains except millet and sorghum. They're safe. They don't have these lectins. I ask people to pressure cook or ferment beans and legumes. I ask people to peel and de-seed tomatoes, peppers, uh, avoid white potatoes. It's interesting. My grandmother was French on my mother's side, and my mother was taught to always peel and de-seed a tomato before she gave them to us. And I've been in Italy, and it's against the law to make tomato sauce or paste without peeling and de-seeding tomatoes. And
So you mentioned lectins. What is so dangerous about
all
the
right,
lectins?
lectins are part of the plant defense system against being eaten, either they or their seeds. And we forget that plants, like bacteria, have been around a very long time, and they, believe it or not, do not want to be eaten. And they can't run, they can't hide, they can't fight, but they're chemists of incredible ability. So they've designed a system to make animals think twice about eating them. And one of those that I got interested in were lectins, which are proteins that literally bind to the wall of our gut and make holes in the wall of our gut. And this is part of the research that Alessio Fasano found when he was trying to figure out why celiac disease, which is the extreme form of gluten intolerance, happened. And he discovered the mechanism. So this is not conjecture. We can measure these things. We can measure the antibodies to these things. And the good news is these antibodies go away. But believe me, I have nothing against bread. It's just our bread in the United States, in its current configuration, is mischievous.
Dr. Gundry, this has been amazing. I have so many questions still. We should do a follow-up interview in a few months. Yeah, a second episode. So last question, where can people learn more and connect with you?
Well, so they can find me on drgundry.com, my supplement and food company, gundrymd.com, the Dr. Gundry Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. I've got 2 YouTube channels, Instagram, and hopefully I wave to you from the internet when you're surfing and I pop up. So
Great. Thank you so much.
thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
It's been very interesting. Let's talk soon.
This was just one episode. There's so much more to discover. Check out the full podcast series, subscribe for future episodes, and let me know your thoughts in the comments.